Welcome into the JP and Hack Show, part of the Field of 12 Media Network. This is Season 1, Episode 15, presented by our partners over at Bet River Sportsbook. 15 episodes in, and this is going to be the saddest one that I ever do, hopefully. My team took it on the chin. We will absolutely dive into that. Hack, it's been a rough season for Penn State, so I think we both have some sorrows to kind of get out here. But what do you say, man?
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten the slow bleed, just slowly just adding spears to me throughout the year, and you kind of just got one at a foul swoop. So I don't know which one's better, but they both definitely suck in their own ways. So yeah, it's gonna be fun to dive into it. I mean, it'll be cool. It's good for us to talk about, to give us a little bit of change up, but at the same time, I'm sure we'll figure out a way to pull some positives out of it.
Yeah, we'll try to pull some positives for sure, but we'll get you a recap of the Week 13 action, starting with Illinois over Northwestern 47-14. That game, I don't know if you caught it, but it really stood out to me, just the way that Brett Bielema gets his guys playing, because you look at the upsets that they pulled against your boys in Penn State, obviously, and then against Minnesota, but this is a rivalry game. And the way that they came out, I think it was 37 points in the first half. You can tell that program is heading in the right direction.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about this game last week, just the inconsistencies on both sides, and to see Illinois string it together after the year that they've had, the ups and downs in terms of the year that they had, to put a full game together. That's good for them moving forward.
Definitely. Purdue 44, Indiana 7. Purdue this year was obviously historic for them. They won as many games as they've won, it seems like, in 2 decades. And the offensive output is something that we had mentioned. I think one of the bigger stories is the way that their defense came together, because they have 3 defensive coordinators, which is so unique. And they were able to really play well. And then on the flip side of that game, and I know our producer Austin is probably ready to just pack the season away, but Indiana, just a rough season between injuries and all the things that they had, preseason expectations. So there'll be a lot for them to grind into in the offseason.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's an epic fall from grace. But Rome wasn't built without its trials and tribulations. So I think they got the right guy leading the ship there. It's unfortunate with the amount of momentum they had. I think they had everything set up for it to be a quicker path, but now they're going to have to lick their wounds a little bit and get to work. But I think they can still do it moving forward.
Yeah, and they have some questions, obviously, to get answered about some of the positions and personnel and everything. But I agree with you. I don't think it's a terrible thing to have a setback in terms of the trajectory of growth, because it's never a flat line. So right. You look at this Maryland Rutgers one, and this one was big. We talked about the implications here for either team making a bowl game. And one of the things that we had mentioned was Maryland needed to be explosive offensively, but they also needed to manage the game in terms of penalties and in terms of turnovers, which they absolutely did. So they ended up winning that one over Rutgers 40-16. And so as you look at Maryland now as the team that gets the benefit, obviously, of going to a bowl game, but not just that, they get the 15 bowl practices for development. And then Rutgers, who, depending on their APR, because apparently there aren't enough teams that have made it to 6 wins, could get back in it. Big for Maryland. And then Rutgers is getting really close to what we think that they can become one day.
Yeah, we talked about it. I think Rutgers is really that 5-year plan, and I think this is a great foundational year for them. I thought they showed what I think is going to be their identity as a team, a very tough, hard-nosed defense for the most part that can present its issues. And once they start getting some talent in there, I think that'll help out a lot. And then offensively, I think they just need to get a couple guys in there that can make plays for them and create some mismatches. And like I said, obviously Shiano's already built that once, so I'm excited for him. And then for Maryland, man, I mean, all the revamp that they've got a brand new state-of-the-art facility.
Yeah,
there's so much good going on there. So again, just another great foundational building block for that program moving forward as well. And the direction that both of these are headed, like we've talked about, I think it's just only going to continue. Both of these programs are headed. I think it's only going to continue to strengthen the Big Ten, which is ultimately what us as Big Ten people want to see, is a very, very strong competitive conference top to bottom.
Yeah, and Maryland is one of those teams. I liked a lot of their personnel when they were healthy. I just thought they were a team that could get in their own way a lot, which they did. And we saw the highs of the highs, also the lows of the lows for this team. And for Rutgers, I truly think that their defense largely this year was solid. They were a good unit. I think the quarterback position would be a game changer for them. They've got this 4-star kid that came in that they're going to try to bring along. If they can hit on a quarterback that can be what Talia kind of is for Maryland, that type of player, that's a game changer for them.
Yeah. And then, I mean, there's so much talent in the state of New Jersey too. And that's always been a big thing with Shiano, is keeping guys home and being able to pull some of those guys away from the Ohio States and the Penn States and a couple of those other big Northeast programs that have come in and taken some talent out of here. If he can keep a couple of those skilled guys home, I think that'll be big for him.
No, I definitely agree with that. We had Michigan State 30, Penn State 27. This was the what are we saying? This is a $170 million game, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of money roaming the sidelines in that one. Just from the visual component of that game, looking at that field with all of that snow and Penn State wearing the white jerseys, I thought it was just wild looking at it. It was a football scene. It was what we like in November up here in the Midwest. And it was one of those where, Penn State was hitting their shots down the field, which we knew they could do, with Parker Washington and Jahan Dotson. And Kenneth Walker was running the rock, which we knew he could do. And I think that both of these teams kind of stayed on script. It's just that Michigan State, you felt like that was a program with the momentum at the time. And Penn State's probably got some introspection to do this offseason to figure out how they're going to get back in competition in the East.
Yeah. And I mean, just now losing Brent Pry is a big thing, and I'm sure we'll get into that. We'll get into that down the road. But I mean, like we said, and we've talked about it over and over again with Penn State, physicality up front kind of hurt them, and the inability to consistently run the football, I think, puts a lot of pressure on Clifford to make plays. And I thought he played his heart out, and I thought he played a really gutsy game and kept him in it. But I think Michigan State was I'm not going to say more prepared, but they seemed to keep their heads in it throughout the course of the game and the ups and downs. And they had a little bit more stability and consistency to always fall back on, I think, than Penn State did throughout the game, at least offensively with Kenneth Walker, and then being able to push the ball outside to those guys and make some plays. So, I thought it was a great game. I thought it was an evenly matched game, and it was a fun game to watch.
Definitely was a fun game. And these are two programs for me, like we're going to talk about Ohio State, Michigan in the East, but I mean, this is, the Big Ten East, man. I mean, once Penn State gets that thing to where it was a couple of years ago where they were in competition, obviously with Michigan knocking off Ohio State and then Michigan State winning 10 games this year, like this is for the next couple of years going to be really interesting, and truly probably 4 coaches that are going to be around for at least the next 3 or 4 or 5 years too. So.
Yeah, and it's funny, man. Like when you sit there and you look at it, Michigan kind of got a great draw with the gauntlet that we talked about, with these 3 teams all kind of facing each other, having played Michigan State first and getting that loss out of the way, and then really having Ohio State at the end, and then a couple games in between Penn State. I thought they had a really good draw for that and let everything else kind of play out.
Yep.
Penn State kind of shot themselves in the foot with the Illinois loss heading into that, but
for sure,
if that had not happened, it would have been really interesting, because there would have been a lot more on the line with a couple of these games. But I thought Michigan's draw was very favorable for them, and looking at it that way, not surprised it played out the way it did. But I think that's going to be a consistent theme throughout the years, as you were saying. I think it's just going to get better and better and stronger and stronger.
Yeah. And we'll obviously we're going to dive into what this Michigan program is right now. But their early season schedule really worked out for them too. Like Washington ended up being a bad football team this year. And so it really allowed Michigan to build into what they had become by the end of the year. Ohio State lost their margin for error early on because they played an Oregon team that really exposed them. And Michigan had the benefit of not having that. And so when their loss came, there was still more of an identity. And there was a way to continue because they felt like everything was right in front of them, especially with the rival coming up. Really unique that you point that out. But it was a hell of a year there. Getting back to a little recapper here, Minnesota 23, Wisconsin 13. And we're going to kind of do a deep dive into this game because it was one of the games of consequence this weekend in the Big Ten. But I will say this is Minnesota is one of the most confusing teams in the Big Ten to me this year, where at their worst, they could lose to Illinois and they can lose to Bowling Green. And at their best, they could beat a Wisconsin team that I thought was really hitting their crescendo and playing some of their best football toward the end of the year. They challenged Ohio State early. And it's going to be really unique to see what PJ Fleck's team looks like. First off, when they have a full complement of running backs and they're not moving guys over from linebacker, but just kind of as this thing continues to go.
Yeah, I think PJ does such a phenomenal job from a recruiting standpoint to get kids to want to go there. I think if he continues to put a lot of emphasis on that, they're almost that step above a cyclical program with Northwestern that we talked about. I think just PJ's ability to relate, get kids there to buy in is a little bit more young and energetic than Pat. Not saying that Pat doesn't have it. It's just different. I think it's just
it's different. It's a different
personalities. It's different. They're both good, but they're different. I think that is going to allow them to not fall into that same trap. But there's, again, like you said, there's just some pieces missing. And I think that PJ's smart enough to be able to identify those and go fix those holes and address those issues.
Yeah. And the buy-in is something that we've talked about, but like this offseason, I'm sure they're going to have a phenomenal offseason because that's something that PJ is going to demand and the guys are all going to be into. And like I said, it's going to be fun watching them in spring and then as next season gets started, because I there's something about that program with PJ Fleck as the leader and what he can do to motivate teams that I think is extremely dangerous.
Yeah. 100%.
All right. Iowa 28, Nebraska 21. We're doing a deep dive into this one as well. But Iowa now in the Big Ten championship representing the West. Nebraska probably happy to be able to take a break right now.
Yeah, man. You felt so bad. Like that was the first time as like a viewer that I felt bad for somebody and a team and a program because they had it and then they, Iowa gets gifted. I'm not going to say gets gifted, but I it's hard to pick who would be a great representation out of the West for the Big Ten championship game. I think right now, I don't think Iowa was my first choice the way they've been playing.
Right.
So they get gifted a trip to Indy, we'll see what happens, but it's just, Scott, man. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think they're ready to do a little reflection here for a couple weeks and then focus on winter workouts and getting things tuned up and cranked up.
Dude, I don't even know how much conversation there would be about the past year, honestly. Like, I mean, you have to have the conversation and you have to analyze what went on. But everything I'm doing is taking what happened last year and what we need to do, and I'm spinning everything forward. Like, you literally have to flush this year because it almost felt so fluky at times the way that they had lost games. And you know that there are some legitimate issues there to correct, but like, harping on it and reliving it for a whole offseason, I think will do more harm than just saying, you know what, F it, we're just going to forget, like pretend like it never happened.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think the one thing that we talked about last week was, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, but it was one of the more recent ones, is just about the focus and the focus internally in that locker room and taking control of it. And I think that when you can brush up, and I know it's an old stupid adage that people will say, but when you can brush up the little things in the weight room and finishing drills and things of that nature, I think that it translates.
It does.
Good teams don't do that. Bad teams do cut corners.
Yep.
And whether it's the fact that they cut corners or not, that's it. That's something that doesn't happen with great teams and good teams that execute and don't shoot themselves in the foot. So I think a hyper focus on that and just really trying to find some foundational pillars to build in within your locker room for leadership and expectations of the program when you step foot in the Nebraska football facility.
I'm with you 100% on that. And then the final one in this one, pains me to read this score. My heart is broken. I had a very, very bad day on Saturday. Michigan 42, Ohio State 27. Michigan snaps their losing streak against the Buckeyes. They position themselves as the winners of the Big Ten East, the representative of that division in Indianapolis for the first time. And they put themselves in a hell of a position to get into the college football playoff for the first time as well. This one is a deep dive game, but I will say this. Pissed a lot of Buckeye fans off the Sunday before this game because I had mentioned how complete this Michigan team was and how there wasn't an apparent weakness in that they could do a little bit of everything. And Ohio State fans were, you're trying too hard to be objective. And, whatever the case was, they thought I was just full of shit.
Yeah.
But if you watch the football games, you could see that even though Ohio State was as explosive as they had been, there were some very apparent weaknesses to their team. Their offensive line had struggled at times. The defense was just not very good. And I had harped on that because that's my side of the ball as a former linebacker. That's what I'm going to do. Yeah. You looked at Michigan and what they had been building, and I think it was a lot of narrative that they couldn't throw the ball because we had both talked about how we thought Cade was a very good quarterback, especially in that offense. Their offensive line is a really good unit, and the defense was solid all around. And I think Ohio State fans and players learned the hard way about how solid of a team that the Wolverines are.
Yeah. I mean, it was impressive. And it pains me too on a little bit of a lesser scale to say it, but they proved that they went out and did it on the field and did it between the lines. And that's all you can ask for as a fan and as somebody who's now watching and analyzing it. So I'll save the rest for later, but it was, I think, a program defining and a tenure defining win for Harbaugh.
Yep.
And I think I just hope, like I said, I just hope that all of this positive energy coming from Michigan State, and then hopefully Penn State can get it back on the track. So just hope it makes it a much more competitive Big Ten top to bottom, because as much as it's good for us to have a dominant team like Ohio State, who's always going to be pegged preseason to make it to the playoff.
Yep.
It'd be so much better if there's 4 teams that any given Saturday can roll out there and be like, yeah, that team can definitely represent us. Yeah. I think it'll be really good for the conference. So I just hope that Michigan keeps this thing going and it's not a fluky one and done thing.
Yeah, it's great for the conference. I think it's great for college football. And right now in a 4-team playoff, obviously, you don't want too much beating up going on within divisions because it makes it a lot harder to get that team into the playoffs. But as this thing expands, you really want it to be as competitive as possible because everybody's still going to have something to play for at the end of the year. Like you can make a case that Ohio State, and Michigan State, and a Penn State in a 12-team scenario could all have a shot based off of where they're ranked and what people truly think about them if they're all playing competitive games and they blow out their out of conference and everything.
And here's the other thing though too is I agree with you to an extent on you don't want to be beating each other up within the conference and specifically within one division of the conference. But I mean, look at the SEC, right? And
yeah.
I think if you get to that point, it's going to force Ohio State to kick it into another gear. You know what I mean? It's going to force all of these programs now to go, okay, let's get it into another gear. And then to me, that makes them more competitive on the national scale. Right now you're sitting there and you're looking at it and you're like, okay, there's really 2 conferences, take the Big 12. That's kind of cyclical. Take the Pac, take the out West, take all those ones, ACC, whatever. Yeah. I think the Big Ten and the SEC have positioned themselves to be able to be as deep as any conference and as competitive as any conference. And I think that's only going to help the cream really rise to the top when it comes to who's going to be hoisting the trophy at the end of the year. So I think it'll force everybody to raise their level. I hope it makes it a lot more competitive nationally rather than that national championship trophy kind of always staying down there in that SEC belt.
I'm with you, man. I'm 100% with you. Let's get into a couple of these deep dive recaps here. We've got Iowa 28, Nebraska 21. So we mentioned it for Nebraska. I mean, this had to be just as rough of a year as you could really have. And I'll read you the box score here by quarter. So at the end of the first quarter, it was 7-0 Nebraska, and then Nebraska had a 14-6 lead. And at the end of the third quarter, it was 21-9. Nebraska had that lead. And then the fourth quarter, Iowa scores 19 points. Nebraska scores 0. And that's your game right there. Like, this is a team that has figured out every single way to lose a football game. They had a punt blocked that turned into points directly. They had a penalty for an intentional grounding in the end zone that led to points directly. I mean, these are things that it's almost hard to lose games the way that they do. And none of them have been blowout bad losses. This is a team that you could make a case that should have 8 or 9 wins right now, except for they can't stay out of their own damn way.
Yeah, it's been one of the most intriguing watches of an entire season for me in probably my lifetime. Scott Frost is not a bad football coach. I don't think any of the guys that he has there are assistants are bad football coaches. I don't think Nebraska doesn't have talent. They got talented players. It's so strange seeing what Scott did at UCF. And granted, he's not playing the Big Ten week in, week out down there, but that was a disciplined football team. That was a high energy football team. They never killed themselves. They shot their shot. They were aggressive the way they played. How that attitude doesn't translate to Nebraska is so head scratching to me. Yeah. And like I said, he's got to figure it out here this offseason. And it's not insurmountable, but there's got to be some ownership within that locker room, I think. And it's all in the details. Like you said, it's almost like they're shaving points, dude. Like, you can't make some of this shit up. Yeah. It's insanity, really. So,
yeah. And from the player perspective too, like, I know you've probably been in this situation before. So on 2 really bad NFL teams, I was in this situation a number of times, but like, things are going well, and then you watch that first bad thing happen, and your mind automatically goes to, oh shit, here we go again.
Exactly.
And I truly believe that was a part of the demise late in the year, was that they could not overcome the first or the second mistake mentally.
Yeah, they've seen that story too many times.
Yeah, and then it just like the rest of the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah.
It's a tough spot to be in, but if you're Iowa, you're pretty happy. You get the win in typical Iowa fashion with great defense and great special teams. And then they sat at home and they watched Minnesota beat Wisconsin to cement their spot as the West representative in the Big Ten championship game. And so for Iowa in this game, it's super unique to me because they finally ran the ball with some success. They had 186 on the ground. They ended up being pretty balanced just in terms of total yardage. They had 178 throwing the ball. Padilla was in the game, did not have a very good game. He was 43% completion. So they brought Petrus back in, and he really wasn't a lot better. Padilla was 6 for 14. Petrus was 7 for 13. It's a passing game that has issues. It's also an offensive line that gives up entirely too many sacks. And that's been a story this year for them. And so just as you look at this team, it's old school in the fact that they value the defense and the special teams, and they want to get started on the run, but it's really hard, especially when you watch, and I know part of it was the defense, but you watch them put up 50 against Maryland, and then this is the offense that we get at the end of the year. It's almost mind-boggling.
Well, it's funny because their deficiencies fight their proficiencies, if that makes sense. Their
It does.
ability to run the football, their ability to run the football, or at least this week and then earlier in the season they had a little stretch there where they couldn't get out of their own damn backfield. But their ability to run the football, usually as an offensive lineman, that's like, hell yeah, that's great, because now most of my pass protections are going to be me firing off the ball. You're going to have linebackers hitting it, but then they're going to be bailing out, trying to get back to their zones. And hopefully you're going to be replacing and bada bing, bada boom, up and down the field, right? Like the whole run action, play action, get them on, move the pocket, get them out on the edges, things like that. The ebbs and flows of it, it's supposed to work that way. But when you can't protect, even with a great running game, that's a hard thing. And when you don't have guys that can separate and win one-on-one consistently, that's another hard thing. So it's almost like their best chance from a passing game standpoint is spread it all out and just dink and dunk it down the field the whole way. Possession type passing, horizontal stretch the zones. If you want to bring pressure, we'll just throw hot. That's fine.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really marry with how they run the football.
It's not who they are.
One back, two back sets. So it's like, you can't, it's hard to mesh and create and maximize your talent pool and what you have as your team and put them in positions to be successful. It's hard to mesh the two because you're lacking something on either side.
Yeah.
And it's got to be frustrating as an offensive coordinator, but at the same time, that's why you get paid. You got to figure out ways to do it creatively, and they're going to have to do it really fast with this Michigan team coming this weekend. All
right. So, but let's dig into that just a little bit deeper, though. It's interesting how you mentioned the, kind of spread them out, dink and dunk, type of passing game. When their offense was at its peak, they were running from a defensive standpoint, what we would say 5-out concepts, where the running back wasn't staying in protection. Yeah. And so, it's coming out in rhythm, it's coming out hot. And they were hitting those angle routes, Texas routes, whatever you want to call it. They were hitting the flat routes with the running backs. And that was a big part of what they were doing. And it kept defenses on their toes in the pass game. And I don't know if it was partially because their quarterback was banged up or whatever the case was, but that's something that's kind of fallen off. And the other part of it that you mentioned, I think this is probably philosophically why you can't do that all the time, is it literally, they're a zone team, but they're a pro style running team where they want to make sure that they're in the, the running backs at home in the dot. And, he can have his pick basically of the holes in the zone there. I don't know if that their run game is very effective when they're running out of the shotgun. And so those two things don't necessarily marry very well. Like, it's really hard to get the running back out of the backfield when the quarterback's going from under center. You're swinging the ball out, but you can't get those angle routes the same way. It's just a little bit different. It's a hard position to be in when your pass game and your run game don't marry very well.
Yeah, and that's really hard, and you create tendencies then, and I think that's part of the reason what ultimately got to him is if Seven's back there in shotgun, like, hey, right. We can dedicate 6, maybe even 5 guys to the box and not really have to worry about it. We can really start.
They're throwing it 80% of the time, Yeah.
You know what I mean? So then it becomes the whole analysis and statistical breakdowns that defenses have gotten so good at now, and it just puts you in a really hard spot. And that's why the most successful offenses usually keep it really consistent. It all looks the same, and they window dress it the same. And, all the presentation looks the same at the snap of the football, but there's a lot of different ways they can go with it. And I don't think Iowa has that luxury.
No, they definitely don't. And it'll be something to examine, I think, in the offseason, is philosophically, what do you want to be? Because, we saw this team when they were humming. We thought they were the second best team in the country. And if you can figure out a way to make sure that the offense can play to the level that their defenses played most of the year, then it becomes a really dangerous thing, especially over there in the West. Minnesota 23, Wisconsin 13. So this is a really unique game because we were sitting in studio at the Big Ten Network, and the comment that we all believed was that you're going to want to stop either running game if you're either team. And whoever can throw the ball better, make the better plays throwing the football, is going to win the game. And so Tanner Morgan wasn't electric throwing the ball. He was 11 for 16, which is 69%. It's a good percentage, but it's not a lot of passes. 199 yards, but he was pretty explosive on some of the passes. And I'm going to try to pull up the big plays here But they had 36 to 26 to 27, 27 to 30. Like they got chunks of yards at a time. You look at Wisconsin on the other side of that game. Graham Mertz was 55% completions. He threw the ball 38 times, which is somewhere that they don't want to be at all. 171 yards total, and they rushed for 62 yards. This was Minnesota really forcing Wisconsin's hand, and Wisconsin did a similar thing, just couldn't come up with enough plays. But this is one of the issues when you're a team that is so dependent on one aspect of offensive football, is when you have to play it left-handed, or Wisconsin, if you get behind in a game, which is where you don't want to be, now you have to throw the whole game plan away and you're reeling.
Yeah, it's funny because when you look at it, like you were rattling off a bunch of numbers, but if you just look at the stat, I mean, Wisconsin had 233 yards offense, Minnesota had 274. So I think this is almost one of those things where when you go back to it, and it's something that we talked about previous weeks, is Minnesota just made more football plays.
Yeah.
And specifically, like you were saying, with Tanner Morgan in the passing game, didn't give a lot of it, but when they did, it was explosive. It was chunk plays. It was momentum swinging plays, right? And both the quarterbacks turned the ball over, but Tanner ended up throwing a touchdown there. And I think it's just those similarly to more of an NFL type game, there was probably 5 or 6 plays within this game that determined it.
Yeah.
To me. And maybe even less. And I think you maybe you could credit it to the fact that Tanner's a little bit more of a tenured guy, been there before more consistently. Graham's he's got some scars from earlier in the year and some ghosts in the closet still. And, that's always tough to kind of overcome on a week-to-week basis especially when you have something that you can rely on in a running game that got stonewalled pretty well. So, like I said, I think it's a hell of a job by PJ and his team executing and making some plays where Wisconsin couldn't do it. And that's football. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And you look at the drive chart too, and I think this is where turnovers and special teams really come in. But Wisconsin's average drive start was their own 20, and Minnesota's was their own 38. And so those are the hidden yards too.
Massive.
Where, if you're Minnesota, you don't have to be as explosive because you're in better field position. So it's a little bit easier to play left-handed in that situation. But Wisconsin now sitting at home, watching the Big Ten championship game. Had they won that one, they would have been in. It was a really up and down year for them. And probably similarly to a lot of other teams, there are some philosophical questions just about how they do business that they would like to answer. But, overall, from where we thought they were dead in the water when they were like 1-3, they turned that thing around pretty good.
Yeah, it was a hell of a fight and a good finish. And I think they have some things to obviously work on, but they definitely have some things to build on as well, which is good. And the fact that they turned it on, they're going to have a bowl game, and there's just opportunities out there for them. So it's going to be interesting to see how they leverage those into their own growth as a program.
For sure. We'll get our final deep dive here. Michigan 42, OSU 27. So basically what I saw in that game was a Michigan team that was physical and they were hungry. They were in the first half of the game when they needed to be. They were balanced 60-40 between the run and the pass, and I think that was really effective for them. And it's easy to do that when you've got a 2nd and 2 constantly where you can take shots on 2nd down and feel like you can convert on 3rd, or if you've got to go for it on 4th down, you can do so. That left OSU really on edge. And then the biggest thing, and we talked about this, a lot of people talked about it, but they said if you're Michigan, you probably got to control the time of possession, limit Ohio State's cracks at it. And maybe it's the other way around, because Ohio State's a team that can typically score in, a 2-minute or less drive, right? Michigan was the opposite. They lost the time of possession, but what they made Ohio State do was really earn their way down the football field. They made Ohio State take long ass drives. Ohio State did not have a scoring drive that was less than 12 plays. And one of their 12, I guess 2 of their 12 play drives resulted in field goals. So you spent 12 plays to kick a field goal. It's not the way you want to play ball if you're Ohio State. And then finally, and I'd be remiss without saying this, but Aiden Hutchinson deserves his flowers for the way that he played in that game. He became the single season sack leader in Michigan history, which is a phenomenal achievement for him. But the way that he played, just the enthusiasm, the intensity, the leadership he displayed, he's probably living in CJ Stroud's nightmares right now, just in terms of his ability to get after the quarterback. But it was a thorough domination. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah, I thought that was a huge point, and I'll echo it. Is just the physicality. I thought Michigan up front, both sides of the ball, really took it to Ohio State in a manner that I don't think Ohio State's had it taken to them in quite some time. I'm talking both sides, and that's I don't know if you want to hock it up to passion or intensity or focus or more meaning more to a program. I think that's something that Ohio State may have overlooked a little bit, at least within the locker room, is how much I think this Michigan team, it meant to them. Just watching them play, you could tell it seemed like it meant more to them. I think it was just getting their ass beat, honestly, for the past few years.
Yep.
And it's a point not to be overlooked. And then I think your point about forcing Ohio State to string drives together and long drives and execute consistently is something that we both overlooked in our analysis last week, and I think is a great point. And when you have a young quarterback playing in that big of a game, that stage, everything that it means, that is something that cannot be overlooked, because the ability to execute and take what's there over and over and over again, it's just, you're testing the quarterback's ability, you're testing his patience, you're testing
that's exactly what it is.
You're testing his ability to not get bored. And when you do that with a kid who has 3 first-round draft picks outside, and then, to be determined 5 or 6 other guys, that's something that's really, really hard to do, because as a quarterback, you've gotten away with it all year. And now in this game, they didn't really allow them to do it. And I think that's a massive point, and something that our viewers should really take into consideration moving forward. And I think, again, like I said, that's a great point by you.
Yeah. And this is not to say that CJ did not play well, because he did. It's to say that you get impatient when you're used to seeing everything happen so easily, and you can take the ball down the field in chunks. And I think that's for the quarterback. And I think that's also for the people calling plays as well. Like if you're Ryan Day and you're Kevin Wilson in that situation, you are not used to calling 12 play drives. You're not used to calling a 15 play drive. You're not used to being in that rhythm, in that tempo. And it becomes really difficult. And then where it becomes even more difficult is when you have to do that when you're playing from behind. And I think that's really something to see there. Now, I want to get into 2 points to talk about the physicality of the game, because you had mentioned it, I mentioned it, obviously. But Michigan's ability to stop the run, which we had a conversation about offensive philosophy where I had mentioned that, I feel like Ohio State doesn't really dedicate itself to the run game. And part of it's because you got a bunch of guys who can make plays throwing the ball. Like, you do what you do best, but Michigan really exploited that. And I think it hampered Ohio State because it allowed those bookends for Michigan to really just rush up field all the time. They didn't take the chances to really run the ball to try to slow those guys down, which I think was it was a big flaw. And there was another flaw there with the offensive line I'll get into in a sec. But the flip side of that, watching the way that Michigan bullied Ohio State on the ground, specifically the second half of the game, was staggering. Because the first half, I mentioned Michigan was pretty balanced. They actually threw for more yards than they ran for in the first half of the game. And a lot of that was situationally. There were opportunities for them to take shots down the field. But their first drive of the second half, they made Ohio State punt. They get the ball. 3 plays, 81 yards, all runs. Blake Corum around the damn edge. And then Blake Corum, 55 yards up the middle. And then Hassan Haskins untouched into the end zone. That was the game epitomized to me in a single drive, is OSU's inability to be physical, inability to get off of blocks, the lack of passion. And the flip side of that was Michigan saying, F it, we're just going to maul dudes, and we are going to assert our dominance as a team who wants to be in control of this game.
And that's such the ability to have a drive like that coming out of halftime, emotional first half, a lot of expectations coming down the pipe, and to be able to stop the Ohio State offense and then come down and not only drive the football down the field, but drive the football down the field in that manner, that will take the wind out of anybody's sail. I mean, that was a straight challenge your manhood type drive.
Yep.
And when things like that, the hidden yards, that's kind of like the hidden momentum and the hidden attitude of the game, right? When you have a team who can sit there and make that type of statement right away, whether as a player you feel that, like being in those situations, it's hard to explain. Like as a fan, I'm sure some fans felt it too, but as a player, you're like, you could look at anybody if you're sitting there watching the game with someone, you're like, dude, that was a put everything on the table. This is what I got, big boy type drive. And they did it. They did it the whole game, and they did it. They've been building to this, and I think this Michigan team has really come to fruition at the right time. And I think that they are, without a doubt, a player for the national title. It'd be interesting to see how they do square off against another physical team like Georgia. But when it comes to anybody else, that whoever comes out of these playoff rankings here after this weekend, I think from a physicality standpoint, it's going to be hard to match up with them.
Yeah, the physicality was absolutely there. And after a drive like that too, as a fan, you're sitting back saying, okay, even if Ohio State can put together some drives, I don't know how they're going to stop Michigan's offense. Like that was it right there where you said these guys can't get a stop. And that to me was extremely staggering because of the way that they were punching, and there was no counter from Ohio State. I'll flip back to Ohio State's offense real quick. We can get off this game for just a second. But we talked about the matchup in the trenches with Hutchinson, Nojabo on the defensive line versus Ohio State's offensive line, who at times had some problems. And the one thing that stood out to me was there was the running backs were out in the route. There was no max protection. There was really, I think the game plan was we're just going to block these guys like they're any old dudes in the Big Ten and see if we can throw it down the field. And I think that was malpractice in a way because those guys had wrecked games against everybody. And Ohio State should have felt no different just in terms of how they had to pay extra attention to those guys.
Yeah, I do agree. And I think Ohio State's of past could have done that. And they did do that really. And I think it was almost a little bit of a shot to their, it's hard. Like this is rough language, but it's really the only way, like their egos from that standpoint. I think Ohio State felt that they could do that consistently with anybody in the country for the past 10, 15 years. And when you run into a team within your conference, and specifically a team that you've pretty much sunned for the past 15 years, when they come out to play, it's you got to be able to adjust. And I don't think they ever were able to do that. I think they took it for granted. And, I just keep saying it. I think Michigan showed up, came to play, and the best team won on Saturday.
That's exactly what happened. The best team ended up winning that football game. Let me tell you about our sponsors over at BetRivers Sportsbook. If you haven't signed up yet, BetRivers is offering a $250 match bonus for your first deposit. But what sets them apart from everyone else is that they require just one playthrough to turn that bonus into cash money. With their new Rush Pay instant approval, withdrawals are not only fast, they are safe, secure, and reliable. Go to betrivers.com today or download the BetRivers iOS app. Must be 21 years or older. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. So let's move on to our big thoughts here. You know what? How about we do some college football rankings? We just got the release here. I'll run through the top 10, starting with give me a sec, guys. Sorry. Starting with Oregon, checking in at 10. Baylor is at 9. You got Ole Miss at 8. Ohio State drops to 7. At 6, you have Notre Dame, Oklahoma State at 5, Cincinnati 4, Alabama 3, Michigan checks in at 2, and Georgia remains the number 1 team in the nation. Anything stand out to you as we head into championship weekend?
No, nothing really stands out to me. I do think, and Herb Street put out a tweet, and we talked about it on the After Dark show. I kind of mentioned it as a couple beers in me. I got to talking about the wreck everything shit hits the fan type scenarios that are still out there, because there is football to be played. But if everything plays out, I think we're pretty safe to say that, something's going to happen. Oklahoma State, I think, controls their own destiny because somebody is going to win that Georgia-Alabama game. And if it is Georgia, Alabama's a 2-loss team, and it's going to be really hard to justify that over an Oklahoma State or a Notre Dame with the way that they've been doing it. And you throwing your thumb over the shoulder, I completely agree with you. But if Alabama pulls that off, I think Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, assuming Michigan beats Iowa and the Cincinnati Bearcats keep rolling. I think that's going to be the 4. But like I said, I think Oklahoma State and Notre Dame are still in play. And there's some scenarios out there where I think even an Ohio State team is still in play if like I said, shit gets really crazy, and there's going to be some arguments and people are going to have to go back to what are the standards that have been set previous rankings, and it's going to make for craziness. And honestly, I wouldn't expect anything less in this type of season, but if everything goes to plan, there's some opportunity, but I think ultimately they got it packed.
I think this is absolutely right. I agree with you on a lot of the scenarios. I think the ultimate chaos happens this weekend. Ohio State's sitting at 7. There's no way in my mind that I think that they should be in the college football playoff. The 2 best teams that they played, were exposed in a lot of ways. Yeah. But we live for the chaos though. So I'd love to see a little bit of it happen. Just selfishly, I would love to see Cincinnati in the playoff. And I've got some ties to that school and their coaching staff and everything. But this is the year, if there's any year, that you would say a group of 5 team would absolutely deserve to be in because of the inconsistencies. And even boils down to a team like Alabama, even with 1 loss, you don't feel like it's a strong 1-loss team. You feel like it's a very tenuous 1-loss type of situation. And I think that is it's indicative of what college football has been this year.
Yeah, and I think it's hard too, because I would make the argument though that if it came down to deciding between an Ohio State, a 2-loss Ohio State, and a 2-loss Oklahoma State, I just don't have a lot of faith in the Big 12 this year. I thought it was really down. I thought it was maybe a step above the ACC, but not much. Yeah. And I think there's definitely an argument to be had there. I don't know about this Notre Dame team, and especially with all this shit that just happened, I don't know how ready they will be if they do get an opportunity within that situation. So that's another element and another layer that was a completely uncontrollable factor from the players within that locker room that just happened. So there's just arguments with even a 2-loss Alabama and a 2-loss Ohio State. Yeah, they're both gettable, but they're gettable in what their standard has been, right? Like they were pretty much untouchable as in recent memory. And now when you're starting to compare, do you give them the benefit of the doubt? And some of these other teams that arose in kind of lackluster fashion without a lot of flair and not a lot of big wins and, a down conference and all this stuff, like you're saying. So I think there's interesting arguments all around, but I do agree with you with the Cincinnati thing. I think it'd be interesting to see. And I think it's just about time. And, I hope they expand, because you want to see teams like this, and going even back to when we were younger with the Boise States, when they were rolling, it would have been interesting to see them kind of duke it out with some of those teams. And, I think Cincinnati's earned it. I think Fickle's done a hell of a job, and, we'll see. But I I think there's a couple teams in there right now that they'd match up fine with. I think anybody's going to have their hands full with Georgia, at least right now, it seems. So we'll see what happens. But I agree with you. I think it's about time for Cincinnati to get in there and see if they can rumble.
Would be very, very interesting if they could pull off a big one in the college football playoff.
Yeah.
All right. So moving on with these big thoughts. You mentioned Notre Dame, and we don't know what the hell is going on there. I mean, we talked about this coaching carousel in this cycle a little bit before and how crazy it is. But you look at some of the moves that have happened in the last couple of days, and this is something I would have never believed could happen. And that I didn't think that there was an opportunity for it, but I just didn't believe it would happen. I was actually on another podcast to tell this story and to pat myself on the back a little bit. And I said that Lincoln Riley at USC would be interesting because that's where all the quarterbacks are at. And that's a conference that is there for the taking. I also said that there was a thought process and a belief that Brian Kelly felt like he had maxed out what he could do at Notre Dame. There are recruiting overlays in terms of academics there. He had made it to the college football playoff. He had made it to a national championship game, couldn't get the deal done. And it's probably because his roster could never be as good as a roster you could build in the SEC for multiple reasons. The recruiting area is different. And then I talked about the academics there. And so I just had thrown out, what if Brian Kelly decides he wants to leave and take one of these jobs? Never thought it would actually happen. Just thought it would be really interesting. Yeah. And we literally get that situation where Lincoln Riley is going to be making a boatload of money in Southern California. And you've got Brian Kelly making his way to LSU. Boy, what are your thoughts on those moves?
Yeah, I think you obviously called it, but I think you were in a very small minority there. I think there was definitely.
Dude, I didn't call it. I was just bullshitting. Yeah. And it actually happened. So let's not even say I called it.
I mean, but to even think about that though, you know what I mean? I thought Brian Kelly was pretty much a lifer up there. I mean, the guy got away with basically murder on national television earlier, or at least figured in third degree or something, whatever the hell is thinking about it and then, not acting. But he, I think it will be interesting because I think a lot of people have a lot of bad shit to say about Brian Kelly, but when you look at his career up there and how I think he matured as a coach.
Yep.
I think there was a lot of maturity for him. I think he's got his issues, and I'm sure he's a really tough guy to work with at times. And it's like anybody, we're all humans, we all have our flaws. But I thought that his trajectory as the head coach up there really forced him to mature in a lot of ways. And I think prepared him to be able to make a move like this and try to reestablish a culture somewhere or whatever it may be, or build something and take it to the next level. And I think your points about not even issues, but the obstacles that you have to overcome at a place like Notre Dame in today's world, as opposed to back when Lou had that thing rolling and things like that, like backbag, I think it's a little bit different. And I thought he did a hell of a job. Lincoln out there, we even talked about it when James's name came up. I mean, it's the quickest path to a national championship. And when you have a program like USC that has history that it has, or maybe not a national championship, but at least a playoff spot, right? Consistent playoff contention. You go out there, you win it. There's going to be a benefit of the doubt. I think Oregon's really your only obstacle. And, they tend to shoot themselves in the foot at least once or twice a year anyway. So you got a chance out there. And then the one thing that I want to touch on a little bit is then the aftershock of that, right?
Yes.
Now there's firings, there's hirings, and there's even some like Brent Pry's move to, which we talked about earlier. Brent Pry's moved to Virginia Tech. Couldn't be happier for the guy. He was there when I was there. I love him. I think he's a hell of a ball coach. He's a hell of a guy. And I think his persona and his mentality and his ethics as a person really mesh well with the mentality down there at Virginia Tech. And I think that's something that's been lost since Fuente's been there. I don't know if he was the right guy from a culture standpoint at Virginia Tech. The
Sure.
program sustained so much success under Beamer, and it was a certain type of success, blue collar mentality, lunch pail. It's just the community, the area it's at. That's what fits well. I think Brent Pry's going to do a good job. But my point being is now we're seeing all these things go. Has Florida been filled yet?
Yeah, they got Billy Napier.
Billy Napier. So like now you're seeing all of these aftershocks, right? Now who's going to go take the Penn State defensive coordinator job? Which
right? No, Ohio State might be in the market for one too.
Yeah, yeah. But you know what I mean. So there's all kinds of aftershocks now from all these moves, and it's gonna and it's not done. I think it's just starting. It's the tip of the iceberg, and I don't think we've seen coaching cycles, but this is probably one of the most interesting coaching cycles that we've seen in recent memory.
Yeah, and you talk about the different aftershocks, right? So Notre Dame's obviously a vacancy right now. And one of the names that pops up for that is Luke Fickell. And he's at Cincinnati, obviously. And I'm 100% sure he is committed to being with that team through a playoff run. But the way that the early signing period is now and the way that recruiting works is it would be a bold move to be patient for a guy who says he wants to wait it out until their season's totally over when nobody's doing that. And keep in mind, Notre Dame is sitting right there on the outside of the college football playoff with an opportunity to get in. Their coach said, I'm done. And then at Notre Dame, they've got two guys in Marcus Freeman, who he's coordinated at multiple schools. He was last with Fickell before he went to Notre Dame, who is a really good young coach, a hell of a recruiter, smart guy. And then Tommy Rees. And do you know him? So he was a quality control guy when I was in San Diego. And he is he was young as hell, but he was an asshole and he was a hard worker. And I'm like, this dude's going to be a really good coach one day. And so there's an opportunity that they hire from within. But let's say Luke Fickell goes there, then Cincinnati's a vacancy. Is that a spot where Marcus Freeman ends up going back to Cincinnati to the head coach? Does he decide to stay with Luke Fickell and be one of the highest paid coordinators? Brian Kelly already offered him
a job at
LSU. I mean, to be the highest paid coordinator there. And then you get to the Oklahoma deal. So Brent Venables is a name that's been tied to that job. If he leaves, who's going to coordinate Clemson's defense? And that's been the cornerstone of that program for many, many years, is the way that they do defense. Oh, not to mention that Penn State is looking for a defense coordinator. We don't know if Ohio State's going to make moves or not, but they could be in the market as well. Like, this is as wild as can be when you just talk about your words, the aftershocks that'll happen once these big jobs are filled. Like, there's so many different things going on right now.
Yeah, and the thing is like all those rooms that you just mentioned, Clemson, Penn State, Ohio State, those aren't just like, come in, you'll be our DC, you'll figure it out. Like, you're stepping into rooms that have a ton of talent and can be immediate. Like, those are like springboard positions now to be able to put yourself in position for the next coaching cycle and do it quickly. I think it's just it's going to be crazy. And the thing about the Oklahoma one, and I think what ultimately pushed Lincoln out of there was the fact that and we've talked about this at length on the After Dark show, but just that move to the SEC. Why
would you want to do that?
The more and more I think about it, man, like they were fine and dandy where they're at, and then Texas wants to go ahead and start. I don't even know why Texas wants to do it right now. I mean, they're barely damn competitive in the Big 12, let alone
the money,
the SEC West. I know it's the money, but I mean, Texas shouldn't have to fucking worry about the money. They have their
it's
own
greed.
network.
Everybody wants more money.
It's crazy, but
it's like a lot of these moves that you see guys making. I didn't mean to cut you off, but some of these coaches are dipping out of good jobs to go to other good jobs that are willing to pay them twice what they were making before.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you need 2 times more money? You're fucking making $7 million already.
And that's another point that I will say. Jim Harbaugh took a pay cut. Paid guys. Dude's doing it right. I think
you see he's giving the money back too.
He's giving the money to any personnel or any employee at Michigan that dealt with COVID, COVID related cuts and stuff like that. Like, dude, hats off to that cat. I meant to mention that, but that's an incredible that's an incredible gesture in today's world, just because of the point that you just brought up. All the stuff that's flying around, you almost wonder, like, when is it going to get back to being about the program, development of men, kids, the X's and O's?
Too far gone.
I think it is, but it's interesting though that there is still one guy fighting the good fight at least.
Yeah. So let's have that conversation real quick though, because there was a time when, you could only be on national TV like 2 times a season as a college football program. And then once the TV contracts really started exploding, that's where you saw this influx of money into a lot of these athletic departments. And you can only buy so many pairs of sweats and you can only do so many facilities upgrades where you have to decide where else you're going to spend the money. And so then it became a little bit of a pissing contest with, coaching salaries were going up, but then obviously if you're one of the big schools and the better jobs, you can pay more. And nobody wants to be the lowest paid coach. Nobody wants to be an underpaid coach. And I think that's where it started. And then, of course, as a reaction to that, and I had these feelings when I was a player at Ohio State from 2012 to 2015. But, if my coach is making $5, $6, $7 million a year, and, we're scraping together money after we pay our rent off of our scholarship checks to buy beer for the weekend, like, where do we fit into this equation? Because that guy doesn't get rich unless we're balling out. And it's all these different things that have gone on. And I think I'm not one of those people that says college football is, headed to hell in a handbasket and it's never, it's not going to be a good sport and it's heading to its demise. I think college football will survive because there's too much interest in it and there's too many people that make a lot of money on it for it.
Too much money behind it too.
Exactly. Yeah. For it to totally fall apart. But this game is big business. This is not amateurism. This is not the college athletics the way that a wrestling team is. This is big business. It's totally different. And I think as people who consume the game and we talk about the game, like, this is what we have to get used to now.
Yeah, I agree. And it's going to be interesting, just the astronomical numbers that are getting thrown around, like you said, for coaches and players. And, but even think about that though now too, right? They open it up, the NIL, and 2 of the biggest names in the NIL market before the season started both got benched at some point in time, and DJ and Spencer Rattler. Spencer Rattler's freaking transferring.
He's in the
got
portal.
A Hellcat and a TRX. He's in the portal.
Portal. So
and who knows how much money he got from them. So there's almost a little bit of self-correction happening too, because of the overlooked element of the fact that these kids are freaking 18, 19, 20 years old.
Yep.
And that's an element that I think is worth discussing and going to at length with people, because that's freaking nuts.
And we can probably talk about that on a different episode, maybe when we're next week when we recap this Big Ten championship. But one of the things that I always said was that this NIL market was 100% going to correct itself, because in the NFL, there are only a handful of guys that are truly marketable brands. And it's because they have been able to produce and they have been high character people for long enough for big businesses to trust them. This NIL deal opens up and businesses understand that there are these localized personalities now that they wouldn't necessarily have to pay like they would pay Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady, and they could get some bang for their buck. The thing that they didn't realize was the volatility of the sport. The fact that these kids are young as hell, like you mentioned, and sometimes the shit just doesn't translate year to year. Some of them weren't even guys who played. Like, whoever bet on CJ Stroud and Bryce Young, they won. If you bet on DJU and you bet on Spencer Rattler, you're probably ass out right now. And then the fact that these cats can be free agents too, where they hop in the portal and they decide where they're going next. If you're a local company that had a deal with Spencer Rattler, like, I hope he had an attorney who was looking at the contract and there was nothing in there that says you pay us our damn money back if you leave, because he might have to do that now. It is such a unique landscape to be in.
It's crazy, man. There's so many. It's uncharted territory, man. It's freaking Christopher Columbus landing. It's brand new.
Next 5 years will be real interesting. Before we move on to this preview, and this show is going on a little bit long, I just wanted to ask you one question. This offseason for Penn State, you got to hire a new defensive coordinator. Obviously, James Franklin is locked in long-term. You've got some positions that are going to be in flux. What are things that need to happen within that program this offseason so they can be back on the right track when the fall comes around next year?
I think they need to make a great hire at the defensive coordinator position. Like I said about that room and that unit room, that's got an ass ton of talent. They're losing a couple guys, but it's still got a ton of talent.
They'll be fine,
and they'll be just fine. I think it goes back to the offense and their identity. The one thing that you can say about Penn State is all of the coaching carousel that's gone on there has predominantly been on the offensive side of the football. I mean, Brent's been there since James was there, and he took over after Shoop left. So that defense has had a very consistent voice for a couple cycles now of kids. And I think that is something that gets overlooked oftentimes, but I think that's a huge point to be made, is the stability there. And I think that's why Penn State has never really had to worry about that side of the football. I think they need to try to find the same thing on the offensive side of the ball.
Mm-hmm.
If Yurcich is the guy, you need to really hit the road on the recruiting cycle and really start developing these guys in spring ball and bowl practices now, especially up front, to be able to execute and create an identity. They need to find out who they are, who they're going to be. And that's something we talked about. They were kind of a jack of all trades, master of none this year. They had some gimmicky game plans that ended up working out for them. But ultimately, when it became nut cutting time and you had to cut your teeth on something, they really had nothing to fall back on. And I think that really killed them this year. And when you have some injuries and things like that, obviously it's out of your control, but you still want to be able to execute. And you would expect that a program like that, year two at the quarterback position, will still be able to go out there and just execute a very small game plan that you guys know the entire unit can execute. And I think that they didn't have that in the Iowa game. That was blatantly obvious. And then just the ability to get back on track after that was really hard. And I think it all falls back on just foundationally who they want to be offensively and making sure that they have the pillars in place to be able to execute that. So that's what I would do. And like I said, I think a slam dunk hire at the defensive coordinator job is going to be really important. Somebody who's not going to go in there and try to ruffle some feathers, but rather go in there, evaluate the room, and put those guys in the best position to be able to go out and make football plays for you.
I'm with you on that. And as I look at my alma mater, and again, I will preface this comment by saying we're a bunch of spoiled, whiny bitches here in Columbus, because a 10-win season and a loss to our rival is totally unacceptable around here. And we know that a lot of programs would be fortunate to have a 10-win season, regular season. But it's unique because I think Ryan is at a little bit of a crossroads right now. And part of that is, you talked about offensive identity, really comfortable throwing the football. I think that the edge in terms of running the ball at will, and to me, it doesn't mean that you have to be a run-first team, but it means that you have to maximize the runs and your team has to be nasty when you do it. It's something to look at. And then defensively, I don't feel comfortable ever calling for anybody's job. I don't think that's what I'm here to do as somebody who is in the media. And so if you're Ryan Day and you think that Matt Barnes, who took over play calling for Kerry Combs, is the guy who should be calling plays, I'm totally fine with that. But he needs to be an X and O guy who's a great teacher. And there needs to be a defensive identity. He has to be a system guy. He has to be able to implement it. But in saying all of that, I also think that football is one of the most evaluation-friendly environments you can be in. And so every personnel on that side of the ball, which includes players and coaches, need to be evaluated hard. And there probably needs to be some hard conversations there. But ultimately, whatever he decides to do, and if he doesn't make any staff changes, I'm 100% fine with that, as long as that guy understands that he is the head coach of the defense, because Ryan's an offensive guy and he can get it figured out and pulled together. Because what we saw from a defensive standpoint for a majority of the year has not been the standard at Ohio State. And you start to understand that it becomes really difficult to win games if you don't at least have an average defense.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, if Ohio State proves to be what they have been, and they've done this consistently enough for me to make this statement, I think there's going to be some big time risers on that side of the football this year, throughout the spring, who played a lot of ball this year, maybe weren't necessarily expecting to, but ended up doing it, who are going to be everything that they expected them and projected them to be and more. And for the first time, I think that this was just you could say it for Ohio State. It was a developmental year for them on the defensive side of
Yeah, it
football.
was.
I
It
think
really
they were
was.
trying to figure out a lot of things. I think some guys were really uncomfortable. And at the end of the day, being able to win 10 games with that is great. And I think that the ability to apply pressure in the offseason and the fact that they're going to be going up against as high powered of an offense as Ohio State is consistently is a huge thing. And I think that inter squad competition is massive. And I think Ohio State has always maximized that. I think there's going to be some big risers this offseason for them on that side of the ball. I think that's going to make a big difference.
Yeah, I'll finish with this comment and we'll get to our preview of the only game of the weekend. But you mentioned applying pressure in the offseason. I can remember back when I was at Ohio State, 2012, we went undefeated, couldn't play in a bowl game. And then 2013, we won 12 regular season games and lost the Big Ten championship and the Orange Bowl to Clemson as well. In that offseason, the mentality was ingrained to us that football is a game where you pay rent every single day. And they used to show us a low light video of the season before we would go into team workouts, just to build that mentality that at our worst, this is what we can be. And this is not the standard that we want to live up to. And I think some of that militant mentality that Urban had, that Ryan is more of a family guy and doesn't want everybody to feel so under pressure constantly because it burns you out. I think an offseason of that would be really good because there are a lot of young players on that roster who haven't necessarily had to earn the level of success. They just walked into a place that was cranking. And I think that just that one thing can do a lot of good. And you've been a part of programs where you have to have that mentality shift and it really changes the team.
100%.
So we'll get to this preview. Obviously, Big Ten Championship, Indianapolis, going to be a really fun weekend. I will be out there. We've got Michigan facing off with Iowa. Michigan is favored by 11 in this game. What do you see happening on Saturday?
Yeah, I think this could get ugly. I'm not going to underestimate Kirk Ferentz's ability to game plan and have his team play up and rise to the occasion, because they've done that over and over again. But for all the issues that we went over, you don't really want to be a team heading into championship weekend who is struggling to have something to rely on other than defense and special teams,
right?
Especially when defense and special teams on the other side of the ball is They're just as good. If not better, because of the talent they have, right? Yeah. So if it's going to come down to a game of whose offense can be more explosive or make more plays, I'm taking Michigan every time. And like I said, there's this element of hitting the peak of their bell curve and this other team that's kind of on that down slope, hoping to kind of hit an upswing. Yeah. And that's a recipe for disaster on a championship weekend. And I think there's just a lot that Michigan knows that they're playing for. And that team has, when they've had to play for something, they've shown up this year, and they've done it over and over again. So it's a playoff spot. It's like I said, a program defining season and end of the season for Michigan right now. And I expect them to come out big and take care of business.
Yeah. And this is an Iowa program who obviously doesn't have the proud history and rich tradition that Michigan does. And it's obvious, it's not to say that Iowa doesn't have tradition in history, but Michigan has been at the pinnacle of college football, and they were the powerhouse for a long time. And for both of these teams, they haven't won a share of a Big Ten title since 2004. But for Michigan, that is a bigger issue than it is for Iowa, because of how many times they had won the conference in the past, how many national championships they own, how many Heisman trophies they have. And so this is program defining in a lot of ways. And it's really, you said tenure defining earlier, beating Ohio State for Jim Harbaugh. I think this is as well, because it would be a shame to get the win over Ohio State and be right there at number 2 on the precipice of making the college football playoff, and you mess this one up. And so there's a lot of managing emotions that go into this. And Michigan was a very emotional team coming into last week, exactly what they needed to be, and it paid off for them. But now you have to replicate that. You have to do it again. And they haven't necessarily been in that situation to where they had to do it. But digging into the X's and O's, don't know how Iowa's moving the football. I truly don't. I mean, I think it's going to be tough to get up and down the football field, because Michigan, like I said before, is a solid defense. Iowa's a team that gives up sacks. Michigan is a team that can get sacks. Like, it's a bad combo. But if you're Michigan offensively, and this is what I would say to fans as well, because there's been a lot of recency bias in how people have evaluated games. Michigan's offense is a very good unit. Iowa's defense is also a very good unit who will have answers. And so you can't believe that you're an unstoppable force if your guys on that side of the football. You have to do all of your fundamental things right. You have to play with the same intensity and physicality as you did the week before, because Iowa can present issues. But to me, this is one of those where Michigan gets up by 10 or 14 points, and I just don't know what Iowa does.
Yeah, I think if I'm Michigan, I mean, I'm coming out with the complete intent to be able to hand the football off 60 times. And I don't think Iowa, as good of a defense as they are, I don't think they're built to play quarters, read and react, let those safeties play in the run game, kind of not, and still be able to hold this Michigan team from a run game standpoint to under 3 yards a carry,
right?
3.5 yards a carry,
right?
When they have to start dedicating extra hats to the run game, I think that's when Michigan's really going to be able to take advantage of some of those mismatches over the top. And I believe that Cade's good enough and has shown that he has grown into the guy to be able to do that and do it at a highly efficient level.
Yeah.
So I just think that once you get Iowa backpedaling defensively, I think they have the ability to run away with it. And I agree with you. I just don't. Iowa doesn't have it offensively to be able to keep up.
Yeah, and you talked about Michigan running the ball, and this is malpractice on my behalf as a broadcaster, because we didn't talk about this cat enough. But Hassan Haskins, give him his flowers too. And this could be another big game for him. It can be an absolutely huge game, because he's quietly just had a phenomenal season. And people have talked about the flashier backs, but this is the back that you hand him the ball, and he's falling forward every single time. He's pushing the pile every single time. He's great in pass pro. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. Like, this is another one of these games where he can shine.
You know who he reminds me of? Hart. Do you remember Hart?
Buddy. Yep.
From back in the day at Michigan?
Yep.
Reminds me so much of that cat. Just a hell of a football player. Give him the rock.
Yep.
And let him go to work. Isn't flashy, gets it done.
He's a
like
tough
you said,
ass
always
back.
falls forward, tough as shit.
Yep.
Like, he reminds me a lot of that cat.
Yep. No, I mean, it's going to be exciting. I'm glad we get to watch this team on this stage. And I know that as a Buckeye, that probably sounds foreign to a lot of people, but it's good for college football. I think it's great for the Big Ten Conference. And, ultimately, I'm one of those people who's not so petty that I want to see them implode. I want the team that beat me to have success. So not that I'm pulling for anybody in this game, but it's been good to watch their season. Yeah,
I think ultimately, man, at the end of the day, we've speculated a lot, but I said it about the Ohio State game, but I ultimately think that the most complete, the best football team won the Big Ten East this year with the least deficiencies. And I think we never would have predicted it at the beginning of the year, just because of the process that they had to take to find themselves.
Yep.
But really, the last 5-6 weeks here, Michigan's proved it, and they've done it. They've been the most consistent, complete football team. And I think the best representative out of the Big Ten has a chance to do it for us right now, top to bottom. And I think that, like you said, I think as fans and supporters of the conference, that's all we could hope for.
For sure. Well, we will end it with that. This is the JP and Hack Show, part of the Field of 12 Media Network. Season 1, episode 15, presented by our partners over at Bet River Sportsbook. Of course, Joshua Perry here, my guy Christian Hackenberg, and we will be back with a little recapper of the Big Ten Championship, probably a preview of some of the bowl games. We'll get into some of that NIL kind of changing landscape as well. But this was the